All right, today we're going to be talking about the social development in children. And when we're talking about psychology in today's world, we need to know that ideas about how to raise children came from a lot of places, but particularly it came from your own family. And then, of course, your church and other, institutions within your community, like your school. However, in the 1900s, people begin to change their viewpoint about children and how we should raise them. Before the 1900s, children were looked at as just kind of a nuisance. They were looked at as mini adults that needed to be trained. And then early 1900s, we realized that children are not mini adults. They're completely different from adults, and they are developing. And what can we do to help foster that development? A good example of things that parents do to help their kids is something called the Mozart effect. Even though results have been shown to be limited as far as the results of this, the Mozart effect is this widespread belief that playing classical music to children helps boost their intelligence. And this is just something that we have done to try to help our kids develop. Some parenting books and theories have more merit than others, however, and parents really need to do research on what is right for them and right for their child. The environment starts to affect a person's development in the prenatal stage. And for example, evidence indicates that unborn children can hear and respond to noises in the outside environment, such as their mother's voice. And then after birth, a mother typically forms an emotional tie to her baby, and this is called bonding. So social development, infants and children can learn to relate to other people, and infants and children both form attachments to the people that they are around the most, particularly their parents. Some of these attachments are secure and some of them are insecure, and we'll talk about what that means. And there are many different parenting styles. So again, the main idea is that social development in infants and children has much to do with their parents' behaviors, their histories, personalities, and abilities. During the first year, an infant forms a close attachment to caregivers like parents. And if such attachments are not created, a child can suffer emotional problems later on. Up until 4 months, infants prefer being held or just being with someone. I mean, they really just want to, be around somebody and have somebody warm and soft to love on them. And after that, they have developed these attachments to their main caregivers, usually their moms. And then about 8 months, some of infants can develop stranger anxiety and separation anxiety. And this is simply when mom or dad or whoever they're very close with walks away, and they're left in the care of somebody that they don't necessarily know very well, whether it's a grandmother or an aunt, uncle, whatever. They will get upset and cry. But based on studies with monkeys, researchers have concluded that attachment grows more from contact comfort than from feeding. And that contact comfort is simply like holding and loving and hugging and rocking and soothing physically an infant. And these bonds of attachment between mothers and infants appear to provide a secure base from which infants can explore their environments. If they know that their mom is there for them and will literally pick them up when they fall, then they are more likely to go out and explore. Attachment is an instinct. You see it in all different kinds of animals. And in a process called imprinting, these animals become attached to the first moving object they see. Children don't imprint, and it takes us several months before we become attached. But when mothers or other primary caregivers are affectionate and reliable, infants usually become securely attached. However, when caregivers are unresponsive or unreliable, infants are usually what we would call insecurely attached. And we're going to speak briefly about autism right here. Autism is a developmental disorder that keeps children from forming proper attachments. It's a brain disorder. It's a neurological disorder, and we'll talk about it in more depth. But autism has a very wide variety of symptoms from severe to very subtle. It's what we call a spectrum disorder, and mild autism can go undiagnosed for years. But parents and doctors usually recognize the signs pretty early. Harry Harlow was a psychologist that you need to know about, and he did what we call the monkey studies. And he had a bunch of baby monkeys that were separated from their mothers at birth, and it's a really sad experiment to me. But they were given basically just a terry cloth towel to love on as kind of the surrogate mother, and they put this little head on it, and even though the wire mesh cage over here is what had the nourishment, the monkey still preferred the terry cloth towel. And that's how we've learned a lot about what we know about what we call contact comfort, that infants would much rather prefer to be loved on and held than anything else. Speaking again about autism, diagnosed cases of autism are growing, and though the increase might be due in part to greater knowledge and better diagnostic techniques, autism can still devastate families, and its impact on society is growing. And at this point, I want you to pause and raise your hand, and I am going to bring you a little website that I want you to take a look at in regards to autism. Parenting styles is the last thing that we're going to talk about today. Parenting styles can strongly affect how a child develops. For example, the children of what we would call authoritarian parents, those who use a lot of punishment and little praise, tend to be disconnected and distrustful. Permissive parents are parents who have few rules and expectations, and this can affect their children as well. Children of permissive parents often have low self-esteem and lack the ability to discipline their emotions. Research suggests that children fare better when their parents are warm, what we would consider warm, meaning that they are caring, they ask how your day was, they hug you, and they, want to be around you. But also authoritative parents right here. They combine warmth with age-appropriate rules and responsibilities. Authoritative parents are correlated with secure, well-rounded, responsible children. And again, here is a chart to show you different styles of parenting and usually what happens to the children that they produce. It's important to know that most parents are kind and loving to their children, but child abuse is relatively widespread and seriously underreported. You do need to know these factors that are associated with child abuse and neglect: stress, a history of physical or sexual abuse in one's family, acceptance of violence as a way of coping with stress, lack of attachment to the child, substance abuse is a huge one, and then rigid attitudes about child rearing, how children should act and how you should raise children. Studies show that children who are abused run a higher risk of developing psychological problems, and child abuse tends to run in families. You do what you know. And so that's a very sad reality. An important thing about child care is that most American parents do work outside the home. Over 50% of women now are working outside the home. They hold down full-time jobs. So that means that daycare facilities are doing a lot of work with our children. Millions of preschoolers are cared for in daycare. But and they have done many studies on daycare and parent-child attachments. But daycare seems to have mixed effects on other aspects of children's development. Children who are enrolled in quality daycares, the quality of the daycare seems to have a lot to do with the development of the child. But children who are involved in quality daycares tend to have a higher literacy rate than children who don't. But that usually evens out by 5 or 6 years old. But children who are in daycare don't seem to be any less attached to their parents than anybody else, as long as it is a quality daycare again. Self-esteem is the value or the worth that people attach to themselves, and this develops in early childhood. And things that can influence self-esteem are attachment to your parents, how your parents react to you. Children who receive what we call unconditional positive regard, meaning that no matter what you do, your parents still love you, usually develop a high self-esteem. And children who receive conditional positive regard, meaning that we only love you if you're doing what we want you to kind of thing, may have lower self-esteem. Gender and self-esteem. Girls tend to display greater competence in reading and general academic skills, and boys tend to display competence in math and physical skills. But there's a lot of factors at play here. Is this because we are doing what we're supposed to be doing as girls and boys, or is this a biological reason? That's highly doubtful. Self-esteem is one of those things that seems to decline during elementary school, and then it reaches a low point about 12 or 13, and then it again increases during adolescence. And self-esteem is one of those things that it's kind of a double-edged sword. If you give a kid too much praise to try to grow their self-esteem, then a lot of times it can kind of backfire. It doesn't lead to higher grades. It doesn't make violent kids any less so, or keep kids from becoming bullies. So current research in psychology is, again, with autism, and you just did that activity with it. So autism is one of those things that they're not going to stop studying. It's way too prevalent now. It's way too important. And we're really trying to find a cure for it. So that's it for today. Thanks, guys.